Happy Saturday morning. Yes, it is the continuation of a wonderful story that we started yesterday evening. I apologize for technical difficulties, but the name of this book is Papa's Mark, and is a very important read about how reverse mentorship can take place at any time. This son named Sims is helping his father sign his name. Yep, because back in the day when African American males were the first to receive the privileges of being able to vote, they would sign their name, they would get their ballot, and then they'll be able to vote. Well, here we see that some of the adults were not able to read and write. That's why it's so important for us to take advantage of all of the benefits and features that we have as far as literacy. I have my students making pictures of libraries. Yes, because it is like the source of learning, and it's so important that they know the history of the struggle of literacy. We see here Frederick Douglass in his library, his personal office, and you see how he had so many books. So we should have our own personal library. No excuse, because there are plenty of books there, and just because I live down the street from a library, and I know the librarian's name, the head librarian, and we have a great relationship. Listen, even if you're a mile away, wherever you are located, there are so many of them in this Chicagoland area, and I'm sure where you are. Okay, so just a review of Papa's Mark. I told you that this is a story about the early developments of African American males being able to vote, and the illustrator of this book used beautiful impasto techniques. Yesterday I said al fresco, wrong Italian term, even though I love to participate in outdoor dining. No, impasto is when you layer oil, paint, and different other types of media and types of paint. And we see these quick brushstrokes. We see how he rendered images of drugstores. This is the community where the African Americans lived. And you see the church and homes and lots of land. So this is a very historic narrative. And we see the general store, and we see a sign of the times, what was going on during that day. We see that there were African American entrepreneurs who owned these businesses, and the community came out to support. And we see Sims and his father. Again, his father, back then, they would just write an X to get the ballot. But no, his father wanted to be able to sign his name. So you see the beautiful, tender relationship between father and son. Oh, for such a time as this, do we need fathers and sons, and daughters with their fathers, and just the African American male to be present in the community and in families. We see where the father was with his friends and they're discussing the upcoming election, and we see the sign, all men of color vote. Yes, because this was a privilege. It was such an advantage. We see how his dad was preparing and practicing how to write, and Sims was sneaking, looking at this. He didn't know that his dad, was practicing. We see the love of a mother, love of a wife to the husband. See the father and son again. And here is where we stopped, where Sims had the opportunity to help his father, right? And we need to think about how we can help others who are not part of our own generation. So how can millennials help baby boomers, Generation X, and so on? How can there be intergenerational learning across the board? Well, let's see. Every night, Papa hunched over the table, slowly tracing the curves of his name. Every morning, Sims checked Papa's papers. So Sims was the informal teacher, son. And look, humble ourselves so we can learn from our youth. And we see how we're learning from the animals here. Even the cows have signs around their necks. It says, soon election day was just around the corner. After school, voting posters were hammered on every house and every tree. Even the animals had posters around their necks. Yeah, this was a very important time. Vote all men of color. The night before the election, the church was full of men. Who's going to go with me to vote? Asked Papa. The men mumbled and groaned. No one agreed to come. A tall man said, we all got families. Who's going to take care of them if we gone? It's just one day, said Papa. They'll be fine. Some folks mighty angry, another man said. We scared what they might do. Uh-oh. Everyone muttered in agreement. Have you ever felt alone? Maybe you had to separate? Oh, that reminds me of a character education song that I was teaching the students this week. I'm a winner, not a loser. I'm not afraid to be alone or stand alone. I separate. I work hard. I focus to do my job well done. I'm a scholar. I'm a leader. I focus to do my job well done. Well, sometimes you have to separate yourself and be alone. And it's okay to be alone because you'll find out you're never really alone. So, Papa said, we go in peace. We go in unity. The room was silent. Yep, sometimes you're going to have to endure that silence. It might be uncomfortable. Sims said, that's the son, said, I'll go with you. The men left. The meeting ended. And something happened where it might make people uncomfortable and they might leave. Might have to sever ties. But let's see what happens. The morning came, just like this is a beautiful, bright morning. Papa and Sims were quiet. Remember that silence? They were quiet as they got ready to go to town alone. Then Sims heard voices outside. Samuel T! Samuel T! Papa opened the door. There sat a wagon full of men. Come on, they said. We go in unity. Sims, your son, shamed us. Right? You see how we can learn from young people? The wagon took off up the road, thumpity-thump, bumpity-bump. Hours later, they made it to town. The wind howled like a blare of bugles. The flags flapped like snare drums. Oh, it sounded like a band of victory. Folks crowded the street. Sims didn't recognize their hard, staunch faces. Papa got out of the wagon first. You talk about courage, right? Bravery begets bravery. Strength produces strength. Courage, yeah, it's contagious. Out of the crowd came Mr. Jones, the storekeeper. Samuel T., he said, I'm voting with you. The two men walked together across the town square to the courthouse. Look at this show of force. You're talking about one of the solutions of the community. That's why I was so happy a few Saturdays ago when it was freezing. But after that mayhem downtown Chicago where the young people embarrassed some of us, that next Saturday, clergy, men, males, this was why this is so important. The males came together in the evening and walked and showed solidarity. And they offered resources and support for our young people. There's something about when men get together. Oh, don't get me started. Just like you see The strength in numbers. Remember this scene? Yeah. Right, Central High School, September 1957. What was that? Elizabeth Eckford? Was that her name? One of the Little Rock students. And you see all these people? Well, this is a juxtaposition of strength. Yeah. But we come through a lot. And we can continue to triumph. Well, I'm Samuel T. Blow. So they're at the election headquarters. Said, Papa, I'm Samuel T. Blow. I've come to vote. Make your mark, said the clerk. Sim said, my papa can sign his name. Papa wrote his name. The clerk handed him a ballot. Papa made a choice. That's right. So this is why it's so important. Even with the new mayor, we exercise our right to vote. A lot of us were surprised that he won, but there's strength with our freedom to be able to choose. Make your mark. Sim said, my papa can sign his name. Papa wrote his name. The clerk handed him a ballot. Papa made a choice. Then he said, Sims, come over here. Let's put the ballot in the box together. Sims grinned. Papa voted. Lamar County changed. A little bit of background from the author. Excuse me if my phone runs out. I'm going to try to read fast. At the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted, abolishing, cutting off slavery. Leaders such as Frederick Douglass, who we just saw in his office, insisted that freedom was not enough. The black man must have the right to vote. Excuse me. Black men were finally made citizens under a provision of the 14th Amendment, which became part of the Constitution in 1868. 2 years later, the 15th Amendment, 1870, protected the right of the black man to vote. Although most black Southerners could not yet read or write, they soon began to see they could use a ballot to improve their lives, like we just did in April in our runoff. This is the period in which Papa's mark is set. Many white Southerners became angry. They wanted to recover their power. Within a few years, they found ways to do so. They required black men to pay a voting tax. Since most black men were poor, they could not pay. Literacy tests were also used to keep them from voting because they were not able to read. That's why it's so important to fill these places, these schools, these libraries. If you don't have a library, still go to the place where they have books. Go to secondhand stores. Go to these little neighborhood, what are they called? The little bird houses, schoolhouse, book centers where they're on the lawns of people's homes. Get those books. So many were driven from the polling places by violence. As a result, many black Southerners could not vote. Women were given the right to vote not until 1920. However, black women found themselves under the same constraints black men had been for so many decades. In the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. and other black leaders organized both black and white people to demonstrate for voting rights in nonviolent ways. In 1964, the 24th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted, barring the poll tax in elections for president, vice president, and members of Congress. That summer became known as Freedom Summer because of a massive voting rights campaign that took place in Mississippi. In 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which removed other obstacles that kept black people from voting. Black people began to vote in record numbers. Yes, they did, throughout the North and the South, but issues continued. In 2021, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Advancement Act, was introduced as a reform bill that would bring the Voting Rights Act of 1965 up to date, strengthening legal protections against discriminatory voting policies and practices. Americans, for the most part, believe that voting should be as easy and accessible as possible. In many cases, it is, however, in recent years, there have been more than 400 anti-voter bills that have caused unnecessary barriers for people to register to vote by mail or vote in person. This has severely compromised democracy. More importantly, the anti-voter bills do not reflect the will of the majority of the people. The late John Lewis, Georgia representative and voting rights activist, fought to bring the Voting Rights Advancement Act to fruition. On August 24th, 2021, the bill passed the House of Representatives, but it has not yet been passed into law. But John Lewis's work, which was for the equality and civil rights for all people, especially disadvantaged minority voters and marginalized communities, will not die. Americans would be compromising democracy if the people's voices were not heard and everyone could not vote. Today, the Voting Rights Act is still as important as it was years ago, even in the 1800s. Voting is important because voter suppression is still deeply linked to a troubling history of legislative laws. We must stand together. The future of our democracy depends on it. John Lewis said, "Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in trouble." Good trouble, necessary trouble. Oh, I know about that. Getting in good trouble and necessary trouble. And here, ironically, is a poster of how our forefathers and foremothers, our ancestry, voted. This is a beautiful depiction of the Selma to Montgomery March for Voting Rights Act in 1965. James Corrales made this beautiful photographic print. And this is in his collection in the Special Collection Library at Duke University. Isn't this wonderful? So, let's not take it for granted. A lot of us have gone through so much, but what we can do is continue to read, become voracious readers, increase our literacy skills. For only some of our students being able to only have 20% or 19% to be able to read at grade level, no, that's unacceptable. When we realize, I can't remember where those tunnel schools, long time ago during slavery, they used to dig in the dirt and the mud, and they would have these tunnel schools, and people would go underground, literally, physically, and some of the slaves were able to sneak and learn how to read and write. Well, guess what? In these tunnel schools, they would teach other slaves how to read and write. And if they were caught trying to teach each other and learn how to read and write, there were serious repercussions, very serious, like the loss of a limb or something. Listen, we have the freedom to vote, we have the freedom to write, we have the freedom to read, we have the freedom to learn. Now let's learn from one another and let's pass it on so we can make this present dispensation, this generation, the strongest ever. Have a great time, great Saturday, learning and teaching one another.